we have gerrymandered maps in Wisconsin. This has got to stop. It is way too hyper-partisan. We need to do something about it. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about what does that mean, right? Gerrymandering. Everyone's heard the term, but I want to talk a little about the history because those of you who've been to a presentation I've done before know that as a history geek, I can't talk about the history before talking about the actual topic. So gerrymandering, right? We're understanding what that is, manipulating the boundaries of an electoral constituency to favor one party or class. So it's been around, especially in the United States, since 1812, actually, is when the term gerrymander came into being. And does anybody know who this particular man is? Anybody? Gerrymander. Close. His name is not Jerry, and his last name is not Mander. But it was an excellent question. It was an excellent guess. This is Elbridge Gerry. Elbridge Gerry, and does anybody know where Elbridge Gerry was from? Where? Maryland? Maryland's a good guess. It's an M state. Massachusetts. Elbridge Gerry was the 9th governor of Massachusetts, and the reason, so he was the 9th governor of Massachusetts. He stepped in and he basically signed the legislation that gave priority to this legislative district for the state senate that looked really wonky. It was just really not great, and so he got published in the paper and kind of criticized because of it. But does anybody know what the 9th governor, Elbridge Gerry, went on to become after he was the governor of Massachusetts? The 5th vice president of the United States. Does anybody know which president he served on? The 5th vice president of the United States. Our 4th president, James Madison. So just really interesting history about that, right? So Elbridge Gerry basically signs this new legislation that creates this district in Massachusetts that looks like a salamander. So they come and they kind of do a juxtaposition of the words and they say, we're going to call that gerrymandering because they thought that the district looked like a salamander. Now, I don't know why the salamander turned into the dragon salamander or rat. And so essentially what you see here is the district that kind of wraps up and around this whole section of Massachusetts and of what Massachusetts was at the time. So it kind of takes off, it gets published in the Boston Gazette, and it becomes this whole thing. And so you can see here, the gerrymander, the kind of subject, and then it takes off. And it becomes not only a term that's used in the United States, but it becomes a term that's used throughout the world. So another example of how the United States is leading the world in something that we probably don't want to be taking credit for. So it's just really interesting that that comes about. So this is 1812. He signs this legislation, creates this district. And so it goes on and it becomes, he actually ends up losing his race for governor 2 years later and then becomes the 9th vice president because why not? So it's really, really interesting. And then when we talk, of course, about gerrymandering and what that means, right? It's good to, now as a political scientist, I get a lot of like joy out of data and maps. So we're gonna look at a lot of different data and maps, right? So here's the basic concept of gerrymandering, right? Disproportionate outcomes, right? So on the far left, you're going to see that there's 5 districts, right? In this situation, blue wins all 5 districts, right? Not necessarily fair, not really representational of the community. In the next option, you're going to see 5 districts where yellow wins 3 and the blue wins 2. So yellow wins a majority, but really you can see how wonky those, and it's a little hard to see. You can see how those districts are kind of shaped up and whatnot. So then we talk about the proportionate outcomes and what that means, right? So in a perfect representation, you'd have 5 districts, 3 of them would be blue, 2 of them would be yellow. So you can see the disproportionate component comes, right? Because there's more people that are in the blue category than there are in yellow. So this becomes disproportionate. Perfect representation exists. And then of course, nothing about democracy is perfect. So you get kind of a really more realistic approach of how districts might come to be about, right? But still making sure that people have the right representation based on the overall population. So that's kind of the history of what a perfect gerrymandered, what gerrymandering looks like and what a non-gerrymandered perfect representation would look like. So Wisconsin gets a lot of attention for this, right? It started back in 2010 when a certain political party took over the governorship and the state legislature, right? Every 10 years we do a census, and then after that, the next year in the the 1 year, so in 2011, or in 2021 as the most recent case happened, we take that census data and we start to divvy up the districts. Not only state representative districts, congressional districts, but then at the local level too, right? We look at state senate districts, state assembly districts, we look at city council or village or town board districts, and what really that means and how we make that all work. I'm not going to talk about school districts because that's a whole different animal, and it doesn't really apply to the rules that we like to talk about with redistricting. So it's something that happens every 10 years. So in 2010, we have a takeover of a certain political party. They start to work on this gerrymandering, right? And the maps were not great in 2010. It really starts to become a very gerrymandered state, and we start to see the repercussions of that. And we make the national news pretty frequently because of that, right? It's a topic that gets talked about endlessly. So this is from December 3rd, 2018, right? And so this is looking at that particular November election in 2018. And it shows you that across the state of Wisconsin, Democrats won 53% of the vote, Republicans won 45% of the vote. But the seats in the assembly are completely disproportional because of the way that our districts were gerrymandered so heavily. So we go from, fairly decent, not exactly split, but close enough to split, to like an incredible disproportionate percentage of Republicans versus the Democrats in the overall population and the state results. So we start getting a lot of attention with this, and this is back in 2018. And so then 2020 rolls around, and what happens? We double down. We become even more gerrymandered when we look at some of the districts. So here's just an example, right? So this is from the State Assembly District 14. This is before the 2020 redistricting cycle, right? So this is the one that was in place from 2011 through 2021. So it's north, this is over in Milwaukee County, North Brookfield, you kind of get a little bit of Wauwatosa. It makes sense, right? You can kind of see, based on the population, when we do redistricting, this block might have to go over here because we try to make sure that there's an equal number of people in each district, right? So that was the way that worked. And you can kind of see, okay, it makes sense. Everything's kind of grouped together. And then they redistrict in 2021 to become that, right? Completely different. So gerrymandered. Like, why? Sure, it's population, but there's really no need for this. Now, I will say, this is a Democratic district. So it's interesting because what they basically did was they said, all right, well, this is a Democratic district, but this particular area in Brookfield is a little bit more conservative. So let's just completely cut the conservatives out of that and give them their own district, and we'll put all the Democrats over here. So what we're doing then is, this is a fairly decent example to show you the difference on how that becomes. But when you look at them side by side, it really becomes stark. And so this is one of the reasons that there becomes so much attention on the state of Wisconsin, and there's so much motivation for people to sign on to be like, let's do fair maps, we need fair maps now. Right? It's really great. League of Women Voters did an amazing job across the state of Wisconsin with other groups that were helping basically say, enough's enough, this is ridiculous. So a little bit closer to home, what we look at in 2021 redistricting is something that I want to talk about in redistricting terms we call contiguous, right? And so we want to make sure that basically every area touches each other and there's no like random islands and pockets of representation. Because one, from a clerk's standpoint, that is a ballot nightmare to try to basically say, all right, these 4 blocks are in this assembly district, but everything around you is in a different assembly district. For example, in the April election that we had 2 days ago, does anyone want to take a guess on how many different ballot styles there were in Dunn County? There's 30 municipalities. Anyone want to take a guess?
28.
I had
28, 30. Cheryl had 5 in Red Cedar. There were 102 different ballot styles in Dunn County, right? So we basically, and part of that is because spring elections are school districts. This particular year was county board, as well as all the municipal boards. And so every time we take a school district and you had 5 ballot styles, right, Cheryl? Because you had 3 school districts, but do you have 4 wards? 4 wards. It's all over the place, right? So
Yeah.
every time we have to do one of those splits, and it comes up with a different ballot style. So the Menominee School District in Red Cedar in District 24 splits, and then part of 24 is the Menominee School District, and part of this County Supervisor District 24 is in Elk Mountain. Like, so it's all over the place, right? So the point in saying this is that whenever we try to do redistricting, we really make a solid attempt in the team that works on it to say, let's try to group everything together and make it simple. Because not only is it easier for the clerks, but it's also easier for the voters to then understand, right? We don't want to put up barriers to voting. I'm really, really passionate about no barriers to voting. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those barriers when we get to the next slide. A little bit closer to home, right? When we talk about contiguous, everything should touch, everything should make sense. It should kind of be in a group, right? A district should be in a group representing, this number of people, depending on what district it is. This is Eau Claire. This is Eau Claire. This is not contiguous, right? Why? Why is there this island here? This is not contiguous. But it's because we become the most gerrymandered state in the nation because of stuff like this. And this is really where we get the tipping point, right? So you see the 91st Assembly District is surrounded by the 67th and the other Assembly Districts. But can you imagine living in Eau Claire, and if you're here, you're in a different Assembly District, but your neighbor's across the street and everyone around you is in the 91st Assembly District, it becomes a nightmare for people to understand. And it's not fair. So we kind of get to that whole component about fairness, right? Contiguous is what I was talking about. Touching along a boundary at a certain point, right? Everything should touch, everything should make sense. That's how it works. So then we get to the whole part where, and I love this graphic because as a history geek, it takes the history part of the gerrymander and it makes it applicable to Wisconsin, right? Slaying the gerrymander. Right, so there's that Massachusetts thing, but it's put in the Wisconsin form. It almost looks like the 3rd Congressional District. But anyway, it becomes this thing, right? And so it really takes off in popularity. People were very upset about it for a decade, and then it gets like amped up, and for good reasons, right? It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. We're disproportionately making it harder for people to vote, and it's confusing for people. And so what do? So we get to the point where 57 counties back fair map resolutions, right? So here's the map that basically says, if it's deep purple, they pass the resolution and a referendum to basically say we support fair maps. Dunn County did both, very proud of that. Eau Claire County did both, St. Croix, Pierce, 57 different counties adopted this. And then it's a little bit harder to see on this, but you see Oneida didn't touch it, but several dot municipalities in the county touched it because the county refused to take it on, right? So you see this kind of overwhelming support for what to do. And then we have an election, right? Elections have consequences, and some people get really upset about consequences for elections. I was upset after the 2010 election, and other people were very upset after the 2022 election, right? Because we had a state Supreme Court race, and it was highly anticipated, and people were really, really passionate about it, and they said, we need to do something about this. And so we saw this huge turnout, right, for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race that ended up happening. So Governor Evers gets reelected in 2022. We have this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. There's a lot of attention paid to it. It's an April election, and bam, we get a flip on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court then says, we're going to take up this issue. And so part of it is political, right, because it's timing. Even though judgeships should be nonpartisan, county offices should be nonpartisan, many different things should be nonpartisan. But in our hyper-partisan world that we live in, it's become less and less. And so the intent to serve really becomes not the voters, it becomes we're serving the party or this particular group. And so we kind of lose some of the intent of that service-minded, oriented ability in which to give back to your community. But regardless, we get the Supreme Court and they step in and they say, no, we're going to do this. We're going to throw these maps out. Well, in the clerk world, that caused a little bit of confusion and kerfuffle, right? Because then it's like, all right, what does that mean? What are we going to do? And then you get all these different groups, right? There's, I don't know, I think there were like 13 or 14 different potential maps floating around at any given point in time about what the new assembly and senate district should look like and how does that work and what does it mean. And anyway, the compromise ends up being, right, that the governor signs the current map legislation. And is it perfect? No. Is it a compromise? Yes. Does it really fulfill more of the intent of working across the aisle, right? We have a Democratic governor and a legislature that's controlled by the Republicans currently. Is it a compromise? Yes. Did Robin Voss do it because it was the lesser of two evils? Yes. But regardless, right, you never want to see how a bill or sausage are made, right? Those are the two things, right? Upsetting. So we end up getting these maps, right? And so it's an exciting time. And what does that mean? Well, okay, he signs the bill, we have these new maps. And so when we look at the political landscape of Wisconsin, one of the things that's really interesting about the way that things change, right, is when we do comparative analysis. And this is the political science geek in me, so just bear with me, right? So on the left-hand side, you see the 2022 map, right? And what that means, and the percentage and how that works, right? So you can see, and gerrymandered just a map of Wisconsin, you get pockets of blue, right? But overwhelmingly, it's a conservative leaning area. Here, this is Eau Claire, right? So that's that really non-contiguous district right there in Eau Claire. So it really becomes oriented. And so you can see the margins on either side, and they're pretty stark. You know, you get a couple of counties that are gray, where there's not a huge sway either way, mostly in the north. What happens north of 8, it's a whole different ballgame. But anyway, when we get to the 2024 maps, here's now what we're looking at, right? And so if we look at, from an assembly perspective, in 2022, there were 31 districts that were heavily Democratic, 52 that were heavily Republican, and then some stuff in the middle, right? Most of them ended up being elected Republicans. In 2024, we get much more closer representation, right? So we're ended up with leaning districts of 33 strong Dems, 45 strong Republicans, and then you kind of have this 10 sort of Democratic, 10 gray, and 1 sort of Republican district. So this is what we're talking about when we say things are going to be really interesting this fall, because we have all new districts, and it really kind of changes the political landscape. For the most part, right, they're contiguous. They're much more contiguous. It gets a little wonky, right? But for the most part, right, everything kind of sticks together and it makes sense. So that's kind of the way in which the maps are anticipated to change, right? This is all anticipated data for 2024. It's basically saying, we're using the 2022 election information and putting it in a 2024 map. And what does that mean? So remember when we talked about Eau Claire, right? The 91st Assembly District, what a mess. This is the 2020, the old maps. And here's what we transition into, right? So now 91 is over there, contiguous. 93, 92. So you get these groups and blocks that make much more sense, right? This group and this area and these townships all are now within, except for Eau Claire. Eau Claire split, but that's Eau Claire's problem. But what we see then is a much more fair representation, right? Is it perfect? No. But does it make more sense? Yes, because we're not gerrymandered to this extreme extent. And so when we talk about what does that look like at home, especially here in Dunn County, so we had the old maps, right? We had these 3 districts in Dunn County. So we had the 29th Assembly District, which covered a large swath of the county, the 93rd on the southern part, and then these top 3 municipalities in the 67th. And then here's Eau Claire again. What a mess. So that was the old map. And so now we shift from there's 3 assembly districts to now there's 4 assembly districts. But it makes a lot more sense, right? You get these larger blocks and larger groups of people and areas of population. And the intent is, right, that it would be a much more fair election this way, that people would stand a chance. So you kind of see, and just how kind of wonky some of those districts are. And so we kind of go to a much more centered blocked area. Luckily in Dunn County, no municipalities are split. So every municipality will be in 1 assembly district and 1 senate district. Not so much in Eau Claire, but like I said, it's Eau Claire's problem. And then of course, when we look at the senate district, now this is going to be a little harder to see. Couldn't control this, but we had the 31st assembly district, the 10th senate district, which assembly district 29 was in. Assembly district 67 was in the 31st Jeff Smith. This is Jeff Smith's district. This is Rob Staff Schultz. And then we had the 23rd Assembly District, which is Jesse James, Senator Jesse James, and that was the 93rd Assembly District, but the 23rd Senate District, right? I know these are harder to see. This is, trust me, it's a lot, this is lighter. So that was the 2022, and then here's what it becomes, right? We shift. So every state Senate district in the state of Wisconsin has 3 assembly districts in it, right? We have 99 assembly individuals and districts, and we have 33 Senate. And so what's interesting about this is the shift in the paradigm, right? So what was the 67th Assembly District and the 31st Assembly District is now part of the 93rd Assembly District and the 31st. Okay, so that stays the same. But Menominee was in the 29th Assembly District and the 10th Senate District. Now we're the 92nd Assembly District and the 31st Assembly District. So quite a bit of change, right? So one of the things that my office will be doing is reaching out, and the county didn't anticipate this, but I'll be sending a postcard to every registered voter in the county, letting them know what their new districts are and what that means for the coming elections this fall. So that's kind of one of the things that we're looking at, because it's important that voters know. Right, it's been really confusing. The state legislature actually just looked like they updated their maps, so that's great. And now they've got a really good interactive tool, but it's been really confusing. And what does that mean? So when we look at a political perspective, right, and what does that mean, and how did that work? In the 29th Assembly District, for example, this was the old maps. 42.7% Democratic leaning, 54.1% Republican leaning, right? That's in that pretty heavily gerrymandered area. What was the 29th for Menominee specifically, which is now going to be in the 92nd? You can see how the representation politically becomes much more even. This is the new battleground in Western Wisconsin, the 92nd Assembly District, right? So this is Town of Menominee, City of Menominee, Red Cedar, Town of Elk Mound, Village of Elk Mound, and then everything that happens in Chippewa, Wheaton and other things. I don't know if that's Chippewa's problem. But it becomes this really interesting battleground, because look at how close we go from pretty extremes. And it's really hard for them, of course, a Democratic candidate, to get elected in the 29th Assembly District, to now we're in play. Now it's something that we have to work with, right? It becomes more fair in representation. So what does that mean? That means that Clint Moses, who is the 29th Assembly District representative, now will have to run in the 92nd District, right? This is a completely new ballgame. And so what I want to just take a break and show you is a couple of things. If you go, first of all, Dave's redistricting was like, oh, that's not helpful. That's just my short degrees. Now I'm going to have like messed it all up. Neat. All right, hold on. I have like 3 monitors in my office, so it's confusing. Okay. Oh, now I can't use it. Okay, cool. Anyway, so daysredistricting.org, right? They have this really great redistricting map, and they go through. If you go up here and you search by the maps, you can look at the different maps throughout the nation. They really do a really good job of having this great data. And so, but what we see, right, is this 92nd Assembly District. And what's great about Days redistricting is that you can really get a lot of really interesting data, right, by hovering over it. So this is where, in that bottom right-hand corner, that's the new political makeup. But you can see how this changes in Western Wisconsin, what that means for this new Assembly District. So lots of really interesting changes happen that way. The other thing I want to show you is the state legislature does finally have their acts together. Okay, so if you go here, the state legislature really does. So you can see like the new assembly districts, right? Here's the new assembly districts. And what's interesting about this and what I wanted to point out was, so currently, right, yeah, 92, right? Currently, Clint Moses, right, we talked about Clint Moses and Rob Staff Schultz, because he's the 29th and the 10th Senate District. what this means now in 2024, the representatives for State Senator Jeff Smith and Tree, right? So what's really, really interesting then is if you dive deeper, what does that mean when you go to the ballot box this fall? It means that we'll be represented by Jesse James and Jeff Smith, both state senators, and Clint Moses, right? So this means that essentially that it's all kind of up in the air, right? What does this mean when we have these new districts? How does that work, right? So this fall, all the even number Senate districts are up for election. So districts 2 through districts 32, they're all up for election this fall. The odd number districts will be up for election in 2026. But it kind of becomes this weird area where we're in, which is like, okay, so now we're represented by Jesse James and Jeff Smith. How does that work? How does it work with the new districts? They're not up for election. And the answer is, we don't have a clear answer for you. Nobody does. Because this is the one part that the Wisconsin Supreme Court said, we're not going to touch that. Okay. That becomes a little problematic. So there's still some things that have to get ironed out. Now, what's interesting about this was, we got the new map signed, everything becomes signed, sealed, and delivered. But starting next week on Monday, April 15th, no, a week from Monday, is the date that candidates can start circulating papers for office, right? They're due June 3rd. And so not only for Assembly and Senate, but also local offices as well. All the Register of Deeds, all of this county treasurers, all of the county clerks will be up for election this fall. And so for us, it's fine. I represent the county, right? But the Assembly districts and the Senate districts, it's a whole ballgame. People are in mashed up districts. There are several districts that now will have no incumbent. So it really kind of creates this whole thing. So when we talk from a political science perspective, it's fascinating because we have no idea what that means, right? We know that the districts might be a little bit more proportional and everything, but there's no incumbent, it's an open seat. That doesn't usually happen. So it's confusing, but man, is it an exciting time to be alive. Because, like, as a political science nerd, this is super, super fun. And every day we're getting more information and more things come out about it. So I just kind of wanted to point that out as that if you want to take a deeper dive, this has been a really helpful tool that the Wisconsin legislature finally has up there. You can kind of see these mashups of these districts and what does that mean. And there's so many individuals now that will be running against their Senate colleagues, right? Because now they live in the same district. And so it's gonna be a wild ride to try to figure out what happens this fall. All right, here we go. There was one other thing I wanted to show you, and that was, okay. Now, okay, don't get mad at me for using this because my college professors would freak out. But Wikipedia has a really great resource. And this is like the Senate districts, right? So here's what we're talking about, the incumbents, 2 through 32. There's now an open seat in District 2, in 4, there's a 16, 18, 28. So there's so many more open districts now that don't have a single representative in the Senate. And what does that mean? And so this is kind of an ongoing tally as people declare their candidacy and how that works. And so it's gonna be really, really great. So when we talk about that, I want to share all the information I have, and that's it. I don't have a lot of other information. The next part that becomes really interesting, and if you've been paying attention to the news, is there was a recount petition filed for Robin Voss. Thousands and thousands and thousands of signatures that were turned over to the Wisconsin Election Commission to recall Robin Voss. Nobody knows where he's being recalled from. Are you being recalled from your current assembly seat? Are you being recalled from your new assembly seat? Because it's different. How do you recall someone from an assembly seat they haven't been elected to? And the Supreme Court was like, we're not going to touch that one either. So it's really interesting when we talk about that because there's so many unknowns still. So we're just kind of operating under the assumption that we're going to get it figured out. And we will get it figured out. But in the meantime, that's kind of what the political landscape is looking like in Wisconsin. So there's a lot of great resources, and I can of course send these over to Ellen if you want me to send some different links and everything like that for you to review. Because like I said, there is a lot of really great information out there. And it's just some really, really, really interesting work that we've got. So anyway, now I'm gonna try to do this. Right. So that's my elevator pitch, but I wanted to leave time for questions because I know there's gonna be a lot of questions. So whether about it's maps, it's about election things, clerking, whatever you wanted to ask about, I wanted to take your questions. Ellen?
Well, part of what I was reading is that some of the representatives don't live in the new district.
Right. So the question was, several of the current assembly people or senators, state senators, don't live in their districts that they represent anymore. Or they live in a mashup district where Jeff Smith and Jesse James are gonna have to fight it out. Do you move for a $54,000 a year job in the state senate? I don't know. You know, some do. Some people are really, really passionate about it. I bet Robin Voss would move to Spain if he needed to, right? That was my one political thing. Okay, it's not gonna be the only political thing I'll say, but it's just really interesting. So yeah, do they move? Do they just say, that was a good run, I'm done? Especially if you're in a really competitive district and you've been in a district that will easily re-elect you every time. Now you're in a really competitive district. What does that mean? Who knows? The point is, local elections matter immensely, but now the state assembly and state senate districts are going to matter way more because they're so much more competitive. And we're probably going to see people coming out of the woodwork to run for open seats, right? This is my opportunity. There's no incumbent, right? Incumbency has a tendency in our nation to say, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. Risky little assumption, but the ability in which for a incumbent to be reelected is so high. So yeah, we don't know. There have been some assembly individuals that said, yep, I'm moving, told the wife, we gotta go. Okay, but who knows? Some people might just toss it up. And that might not be a bad thing, right? If you have somebody who's been representing assembly district for 25 years, yes. Do you get the history and longevity of that? Yes. Do you necessarily are able to bring the newest and freshest ideas on legislating? It's debatable. So whether that means we get a whole bunch of new individuals elected or a whole bunch of people move, regardless, I think the realtors are gonna be happy, so. What are other questions? Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. So the first one is with all of these changes where, you know, now some districts have like 2 people in it, is some of this, is it just gonna be a matter of time before all the elections run through before everything gets straightened around? Is that how it's gonna work?
That's kind of the assumption, right? So all the states, all the assembly districts are up this fall. Assembly will figure itself out. But the Senate, right, because they do, half of them are up every 2 years, and it's a 4-year term. So yeah, the kind of assumption is like, okay, well, you stay there, Jeff Smith and Jesse James, and you can figure it out in 2026.
Okay.
That's kind of the assumption, and that's what we're going on right now. Will they call a special election in, I don't know, that could happen too. It's kind of all up in the air still.
Okay, and then my other question is, so if I understand it right, so it used to be like every Senate seat or district had 3 assembly
Yeah.
districts in them.
Yep.
Fully.
Yes.
Is that still how it
Yes.
is? Okay, is there a map out there that has like an overlay of the Senate with the assembly spots in it?
Yeah. Sure. Yes, and if you go to, if you actually go to the days redistricting, you can actually do like overlay maps. I can't do it because now it's at an angle, but like you can throw in the county lines, you can throw in all sorts of stuff. So yeah,
What's that website?
it's called davesredistricting.org.
Dave's?
Daves, D-A-V-E-S, redistricting.org. Sounds super sketch, but it's really, really helpful, right? It's like Bob's Road. I'm on Bob's Road. I'm trying to find the Taco Bell. But
If you go to the Wisconsin legislative maps, you can toggle
yeah,
them and get an overlay.
yeah. So Dave's redistricting has a good option, and then yeah. Let's see if I can find Wisconsin legislature one. This one. Yeah. So this one you can do the overlay, like just. Well, no, I lost it. But anyway, yeah, you can do that where you do assembly and the Senate districts in 2024 and what that looks like, right, and how they're kind of grouped. It's helpful. And then we can go in like purple, and this is what they were, and then it gets really confusing again. But yeah, there's some really good information out there. Yeah.
Do those tie in with the federal elections, well, like the third district that we're in, do all those little box line up specifically with?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, do all the new districts align with the congressional districts? And the answer is no. The congressional districts did not change. So the congressional districts that were in place, the way that they were, will still be in place. It's just that, for the most part, they tried to overlay them so that no one would change out of a congressional district. But there were some examples that changed in Southwest Wisconsin, where you were in the second, or whatever it was, and you're in a new congressional district. But the boundaries of the congressional districts didn't change.
Did they view those as fair then? Is that why they didn't?
No. No, I think that there's the other component about the congressional districts where they view this, are those viewed as fair? And the consensus is no, that's not fair either. When you look at like the 3rd congressional district, right, it basically takes, well, we could do that. Look at, oh, maps, cool. If we look at the congressional district, especially if we look at the 3rd congressional district, right, oh, right, what? What is this? What is that? It's like the V. Doesn't stand for victory, by the way, but it's just kind of a mess. And so, yeah, those borders are still in place, but it's basically everything else within them in the Senate and Assembly districts changed. But those haven't changed just yet. That could definitely be something that the Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court has said they might be taking that up, but not until next year. We don't know. They refuse to kind of tackle the congressional districts. Other questions? Yeah.
Is my vote up to date then?
The question was, is my vote up to date?
Can we refer people to that to see what their
Their new districts are? Yes. It should be all up to date. I was just looking at that today as we were entering election data, and it looks like it has been updated. The Wisconsin Election Commission gets a lot of heat, but they do a really, really phenomenal job, and they've got all the new data in there. Yeah, so if they go to myvote.wi.gov and they look up their districts, they can see what their new Assembly and Senate districts are. Yeah, it's a great resource. Other questions? 18 hours was the day I put in on Tuesday. I don't know if anybody want to ask that. I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Are you running?
Am I running?
Yeah.
Yes, I will be rerunning I'll be running for county clerk this fall. Yeah. And that's another thing, right, that's really interesting. Well, first of all, I think I'm kind of interesting, but mostly, right, so we, by state statutes, by the way that it's written, I'm a constitutional officer. My role is defined in the Wisconsin State Constitution. And it's designed to be a partisan office. So this fall, we'll be electing county clerks, registered deeds, district attorneys, and county treasurers. Now, I grew up in a certain political party, which I'm sure many of you probably know what it is. And I will be running as a Democrat this fall, because I'm a Democrat. But I don't really have any more to say about that. But the point is, there's nothing that I do in my daily job as the county clerk that is partisan, right? My job is to administer elections. I don't do that and I don't do it in a partisan way. I do it so, in my belief, and you'd find this with all the county clerks. There's 72 county clerks, and even the Republicans will say, I don't do anything partisan during the day. Like, my job is to administer the elections and to do it in a free and fair manner so that everybody has the ability to exercise their right to vote, right? We all kind of really take that to heart, and we do. We don't want barriers to voting. We want to make it as simple as possible. But do people view it, right, differently? Are people going to vote for me or not vote for me because of the letter after my name? Yes. It's just really unfortunate, because there's nothing we do. What does this county treasurer supposed to do in a partisan way? Like, over-assess your taxes if you're a Republican? No, because they can't do that, right? There's a whole system in place. So the fact that these are partisan offices, sheriff, clerk of courts, it's kind of funny. There's a pretty split consensus among the county clerks. I would actually really love to say we should move our elections. They used to be every 2 years, right? In the 90s and through the early 2000s, county offices were elected every 2 years. They moved it to 4-year terms in the early 2000s, in the aughts. But I would really love to see us move to April. Be a nonpartisan election, be elected nonpartisanly. Because like I said, there's nothing, I issue marriage licenses to everyone, right? I give dog licenses to anybody who wants them. Please update your dog licenses. So there's really nothing that we do that's partisan, but the fact that we do that. There are individuals though, treasurers, clerks, that say, no, I want to be partisan because when I go to the legislature and I'm advocating for change on some election materials, I get more sway because there's an R after my name or a D after my name. So there's kind of those two camps. I would really love to see as many things nonpartisan as possible because it's just silly. The fact that people will automatically view me in a negative light because there's a D behind my name this fall is unfortunate. Because there's other people that won't vote for me for totally different reasons. But yeah, it's just unfortunate. But yeah.
Well, since the second amendment we just voted on, it refers election officials who are now supposed to be elected. What does that mean?
Yeah, so Elizabeth's question was the 2 state referendums that just passed, right? Having to deal with elected officials or election officials, and what does that mean? The answer is no one knows.
That's what it is.
They were written very ambiguously. So to be on a statewide referendum, to make it onto the ballot, you have to have the legislation passed in 2 consecutive sessions, right? There's a biannual session, right? So every 2 years, you have to do it over 2 years. So it passed on party lines in 2 legislative sessions. But it was so ambiguous that most likely the Wisconsin State Supreme Court is going to have to take it up because they're going to have to say, how did you intend to define an election official? And so you would have been hard, and I know the League of Women Voters had some excellent information out there on telling people why they shouldn't vote for either of these referendums. And you would be hard pressed to find a clerk in the state of Wisconsin, county or municipal, that was in favor of these referendums. Because organizations like the League of Women Voters, right, shows up to the city of Menominee to help Kate and Carly stuff and mail 1,000 absentee ballots, right? So the way it's written and the way it's intended is saying like, no, League, you're out. It's on the clerk and their deputy, and luckily Kate has a full-time deputy now, to stuff and mail 1,000 absentee ballots out for every election. I mean, that's incredibly time consuming. And so now, not only is it taking the clerks away from the other duties that they have to do, it's making it harder for voters to be able to get a ballot in a timely and efficient manner, right? So for a spring election, right, we have a really quick turnaround between the February primary, which was on February 20th, and the April election, right? We have to certify those February results and be like, bing, bang, boom, here's who made it. We have to get those ballots printed, right? And so there were a lot of questions when people voted on Tuesday, and they said, why is Nikki Haley on this ballot? She's out, right? Yes, she is out, but the ballots were certified, the candidates were certified at the beginning of the year. And so we have to put it in place, the ballots have to be printed and produced, and it's a whole thing. So there gets confusion about that as well. But the point is, we don't know. And if it's gonna be now, the second question, right, the first question was about funding. And this was a direct result from what they kept calling Zuckerbucks, right? So outside money that came into the state of Wisconsin to fund elections during a pandemic, an unprecedented pandemic that we had no idea what to do. So it went to fund things like personal protective equipment, clerk supplies that they needed. I still have 50,000 pens in my office because we were single-use pens, right? Environment, Al Gore was very upset. But there were many different things about that it went to go fund, right? Which otherwise the municipalities or the counties didn't have money set aside to fund these things. So how are we going to make sure that elections were done as safely and efficiently as we could to protect the people unless we had this outside fund? And now, nope, that's not an option. And the part that gets concerning to me as a clerk is when we look at Dunn County, I will always advocate to make sure we have enough money to fund the elections, and your municipal clerks do such an amazing job. But with levy limit caps that we've had in place since essentially 2011, right? Municipalities are feeling the stress every single year more and more, right? Because the cost of things go up, the cost of roads, I mean, incredibly expensive. And they have less and less resources to work with. Well, now we're saying, if the municipalities don't have money to fund an election and pay the poll workers, what does that mean? Does it mean that certain municipalities might actually end up closing their polling location and absorbing it into another polling location? Yes. Is that going to just disenfranchise voters? Yes. If we look at urban areas, especially like the city of Milwaukee or Madison, or even Eau Claire and La Crosse, that could seriously disenfranchise voters. And it's a very, very slippery slope. So we don't know. The Wisconsin Supreme Court's going to probably have to weigh in on that too. So they're going to be busy. They're going to be very, very busy. There was another question. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna ask you, how would you go about changing your position to become a nonpartisan position? I mean, what would that take?
Yeah, so the question was, how would you change your position to be nonpartisan? And well, one, you have to get the county clerks all on board. Ooh. And most likely the treasurers, the register of deeds, the district attorneys. So that's why people feel like, oh, it's such a mountain to climb and it would take so much work. Do you really want to do it? Well, people said that about Everest, and look, people climb it, right? So it's doable. It's certainly doable. It could definitely be more doable depending on this change in the state legislature going forward this fall, right? With the election this fall, how does the state legislature make up change? What does that look like? There's certain options with that. So the legislature could say, all right, we're going to pass this in 2 consecutive sessions to put it on the ballot in 2028 or something like that, to say, do the people want these offices to be nonpartisan?
So it would have to be a referendum that would.
It has to be a referendum. Yep, because it'd be a change to the state constitution. That's what it would take. But we just got these 2 ridiculous things passed, so I think things are possible. What are some other questions? I've been kind of rambling on. Well, anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. If you've got other questions, feel free to come up and ask me at the end. Thank you for the invitation to come speak about this today. I hope it was at least a little bit informational. I'm sorry I didn't have all the answers. No one does. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.